Hi, this is Karen Sweeney Ryle. I'm honored to be speaking at this Grief with God's Grace conference. I'm coming to you from my home in southwestern PA. I would love to be there in person with you, but because of COVID, I couldn't. So I wanted to share a little bit about me. I personally have suffered the loss of my first husband from an auto accident when we were 35. My father was hit by a car when I was 21, and my mother died almost 3 years ago from a lingering illness. All were different grief journeys for me. After my husband died, I attended a support group for uh, bereaved, and it helped me understand what was normal for grief and that I wasn't losing my mind because I felt like I was. In the early 2000s, I worked as a program director for the Alzheimer's Association, and I came to a deeper understanding of anticipatory grief, losing that person a little bit at a time and grieving the person they were and what you had together while the person's actually still living. It doesn't mean that when they're actually gone, you don't grieve, but some of it may have been released and worked through while they were still here. We also encounter many types of losses in our life, and each requires adaptation and regrouping. An example is relationships, finances, loss of a job or career, our health changes and abilities, role changes in our family, such as empty nest or becoming divorced. Some are less intense or tragic, but the process is the same or similar at least. I retired 2 years ago as a hospice bereavement coordinator, and I supported hundreds of bereaved and led over 20 grief support groups, plus several grief share sessions through my church. So, what I share here today is gleaned through my personal experience, through what I learned helping others, and the resources that I learned from in my work. Most of us are familiar with the 5 stages of grief outlined by Kubler-Ross. And I know that Martha said she found them helpful. And they include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So the thing I think we need to remember is they do not necessarily happen in the same order. We may go forward to one and then go back and go through one of those stages again. Some may last a really long time. Some might be a short stage for us, but it gives us something to judge. Why is this normal grief that we're going through? In our hospice work, we used materials from Alan Wolfelt as a basis for our support groups. And we used 6 steps of the journey of grief as a theme each week. He describes grief as a journey through a wilderness. And I always felt that was a good example. If you can imagine being deep in the woods somewhere, not being able to see what is ahead, not being sure what the next step is, not being sure if you're going to be okay, um, and where the end of this is. So the 6 steps that he describes for along what he calls reconciliation of the loss are accepting the reality of the death, embracing the pain of the loss, remembering the person who died, developing a self identity, searching for meaning, and receiving ongoing support from others. Now, I feel that accepting the reality of the death is not necessarily the first step, and it can take a long time for the finalization of all this, the realizing of all the aspects of your loss to really sink into every part of your being. So that part could actually take a year or two. One of the reasons so many grief groups and people talk about the first year is because every milestone you visit during that year, every holiday, birthday, anniversary, etc., uh, it reminds you of that person being gone during that special event, and how are you going to deal with it? Um, excuse me.